How's it going? Welcome back to another episode of Reviewing Old Things. Today, as I said I was going to do a long time ago, I'm going to review the old Dungeon Dragons Masters Rules, right? This set is the fourth in the old BECMI series, as they're called. This one is kind of sparse in terms of content, actually. It's more like a sort of you'd think it'd have more given that it focuses on high level, but it's actually more of a transition into the Immortal set, right? It kind of plays that little middle ground. You kind of see what I'm talking about here. But we'll start with the player's book here. This one gives you kind of the overall guide of what to expect at high levels. There's really not a lot to it. Classes were pretty short. There's some extra spells in this, but otherwise not a whole lot in terms of character advancement. I said some of the higher level spells are included here. Some in elemental kind of stuff. And the whole book is only about 30 pages long, and by about page 12 you're done with all the class stuff. A couple of new armors and weapons. Probably most importantly for this series, and maybe for this entire set, is the rules on weapon mastery. Right? So it introduces this mechanic called weapon mastery that actually I think is pretty cool. Maybe, like I said, maybe the coolest thing out of this set. Basically, the way it works is that you're supposed to create a character, and this is a high level, so it's actually done retroactively, but assuming you start from the beginning, you would basically, for your fighter types, depending on who qualifies, you would pick two weapons, right, that you gain proficiency in. Maybe it's a longsword and a mace, whatever. And then every few levels, about every 3 levels, you would either pick a new weapon to gain a proficiency in, or you would advance your proficiency in said weapon, in a specific weapon, right? And you start off, as basic, and every time you want to advance that proficiency, it goes to skilled, expert, master, and grandmaster, right? And then every time you advance with that weapon, they have a chart that tells you how it adjusts what you do with that weapon. In some cases, in almost all the cases, you do more damage, right? So if you specialize in the staff, you start off at a d6, and then a d6 plus 2, then a d8 plus 2, and then a d8 plus 5, and so on, right? And some of these you actually gain new abilities, right? You can stun, you can disarm, you can do things with your weapon. And I actually think this is a pretty good mechanic, like worthy of pilfering and introducing into another rule set, right? Even this would be pretty easy to do in 5th edition as well. You'd have to kind of make your own rules for each weapon, but you don't have to use the same levels. You can have 3 levels, 4 levels, whatever, right? But it's still a pretty good progression or little system, progressive system. Said adds a little flavor, certainly gives fighters something else to do, right? And it makes them a little excited since they can now disarm with their weapon, and it adds kind of a little buy-in to their style, right? And the only other thing really in this player's handbook is siege rules, right? If you go back to the companion rules, had sort of laid out how to do mass warfare. This one lays out how to do siege warfare, and it focuses mainly on different kinds of siege weapons, catapults, ballistas, trebuchets, battering rams, siege towers, all that kind of stuff, and stats for those siege weapons, and as well as defensive structures, a keep wall, a palisade, stone, wood, how things damage those materials, and it's fairly detailed. At least it's got rules for like how much damage elemental water would do to a stone wall, right? A lot of fun stuff like that. It does have a interesting little rule, which actually probably going to we decided to borrow for our modern game, actually, was rules on how things ignite, right? Whether or not a wooden surface will ignite due to fire. So if you're throwing fireballs around in a town, for instance, whether or not the buildings catch fire, and the rule is basically for every 1 point of damage that it takes, there's a 5% chance that it catches on fire, right? So 10 points of damage, 50% chance, 12 points of damage, 60% chance, right, that thing catches fire. Pretty good, easy rule. Good thing you can pilfer from that. Moving on to, and that's that's basically it for the player's handbook, right? There's really not much in it. You get to the DM's guide here. The first neat thing is that it has a map of the known world that is split in the middle, which who knows how you're supposed to actually look at, but it's there, right? And this book has a couple more things. It starts off with a lot of kind of basic rules, or kind of new mechanic rules, like anti-magic effects, how anti-magic works. When is it, can it dampen spells, nullify spells, what happens to the item when you go in and bring it out, that kind of stuff, which is pretty typical. It does have a new rule for adding, adjusting your saving throws based on your ability score bonuses, which was, not a given back then. I believe, I think only spells actually were modified at all by your wisdom, and your saves were, death ray, magic wand, breath weapon, paralysis, and spells, right? And so there's rules, and they don't even apply like across, to specific saving throws. They apply to certain effects, so you can use like, your intelligence to, if the spell is from illusion or something like that, right? Your con to poison, your strength to certain things, just to stone, right? So it just still doesn't make the saves any better. Like I don't miss the old saves, but it had a rule where you can adjust those things. It had rules on how to create high-level characters, right? And the way, when you leveled at high level in the old D&D, I forget what the cutoff, but you only gain like your D8 whatever hit points up into a certain level. It's somewhere around 20, I think. And then at that point, your hit points were fixed, right? You gain like 2 per level, right? Which kept things from getting crazy because, there was 36 levels back then. So it gives you rules for that kind of stuff. Magic item ranges and prices for characters of said level. Rules for dispelling magic. What you can dispel and how it works. And, dispelling magic's always kind of pain in the butt. Like, there's never really been a good system for dispelling magic that I've really liked. This one is as good as any of them, maybe slightly better. It does kind of detail something a little better using dispel magic and other effects, but dispelling magic is just kind of a garbage system. Not that you shouldn't have it, it's just that I've never seen a system that I really liked, and this is, like I said, just as good as any. It does include rules for how to balance encounters, which might be like your first encounter with challenge rating, right? Because old D&D, even through 2nd edition, didn't have challenge ratings. They just had experience point totals for the monsters, right? And that was it. So you just kind of threw monsters at them, and you kind of got what you got. Here it gives you rules for creating monsters, but everything's based on hit dice in old D&D. So you basically get a fixed amount of XP for a certain hit dice and then some modifiers, right? There's rules for, so when you calculate, what the challenge rating, it's basically you add up all the characters in the party, all their levels, and this gives you you adjust it, but it gives you what they call TPL, total party level. And you take that total party level and compare it to the hit dice of the monster, and there's the way it works. So if you look here, let me just show you. So if you look at a monster like a hag here, the hit dice will have asterisks next to them, and those asterisks represent modifications. I think I want to say it like doubles it, but I don't remember exactly. It's been a long time. But like, what you want to get, if something has 10 hit dice and several asterisks, right? Let's say 4 asterisks, you can kind of assume it's about a level 40, right? So you need 10, right, for 4 level 10 adventurers, this would be a pretty good challenge. And you want to get to like a normal fight that isn't too hard and isn't too easy. It's about 50% of your TPL, or your total party level. And basically, it's some rules for designing encounters, right? The first that I remember from D&D, and they didn't stick around, which is interesting. But it is kind of what it is, right? So if it's 100% of your TPL, it's going to be a very challenging encounter. If it's less than 50%, it's going to be pretty easy. There's, like I said, everything kind of cues off hit dice, all the hit charts in here for hit dice on the monster, experience on the monster reaction charts. What does the monster do? You roll a d12. They used to have a lot of monster reaction stuff and morale checks, right? Which is always fun. But so when you encounter a monster, you roll the monster reaction. And is it friendly? Is it hostile? Is it nervous in the middle? And then depending on what you say, you roll again, and a lot of rolling. But they have charts for that here as well. And then you kind of get to what is the kind of, I would call it the main focus of this book. Well, I don't know if it's the main, but there's a lot in here about what gets you to immortality, right? And this is meant to be the sort of transitional period. Like, you're supposed to, according to master rules, right? You don't just like make it to the max level and then suddenly go looking for how do I become an immortal, right? What you're supposed to do is essentially, maybe in your late 20s level, you're supposed to find and petition an immortal, right? And it basically breaks down like you choose a path, right? And if you remember from the immortal set, you had a time, thought, energy, and matter, which roughly correspond to the elements, which also roughly correspond to some of the character classes, right? And so you pick a sphere and you find an immortal of said sphere and you petition them, right? You give them a gift and then they tell you whether they like you or not, and they send you on a quest, right? And these quests, it's actually more complicated than a quest. Like, first off, part of your quest is to reach maximum level. And then you have to do a quest and a trial and a task and something else. It's a trial, a quest, testimony. And some of these are more or less impossible. They're just kind of nuts, right? Like, if you're going to go the path of time, I think it's right here, time. Yeah, so this is favoring the cleric class. What are you supposed to do? You must find it. Let's see, if your quest is that you must find an artifact that allows you to travel through time. Your trial is that you must travel ahead in time to 3 separate periods and help 3 different descendants to retain their kingdoms and perpetuate the dynasty. And these are ostensibly descendants of your dynasty, right? Testimony, the character must create a realm with a population of at least 50,000 people if a human, or 10,000 if demi-human. Must also design and build a great new capital for their land. And the task, and this should be first, the character must found a dynasty. That dynasty must be ruled by the character and his or her descendants for at least 20 years of a character's life. And you can, like, how you role play, like 20 years of me. I mean, do we all sit around as I don't know, assign taxes for 20 years or something? Like, I mean, like, these things were never really appealed to me. I think this is what killed the whole Immortal set. Well, I don't know. Some people dug it and tried it. So, but these, like, I feel like everybody just skipped this. I mean, and that's just for one of them, right? If you're like polymath, so polymath, you have to be reborn into 3 different classes and make it to, I think, level 12 in each class, right? And quest for the same artifact. So it's like 3 more campaigns worth before your character accomplishes this one aspect of the trial to become an immortal. So it's like, whatever. It's like, sure. Like, so complex and long that you're just never going to do it, right? So it's interesting, if you want to look at something really above and beyond the scope of any kind of normal D&D campaign or TTRPG. Like, becoming immortal was a whole series of hoops that was so complicated that I don't know of anybody that actually role played this out, right? But it is what it is. It's there. It's interesting. It's kind of neat. I mean, you could base a whole life's worth of campaigns around just obtaining one of these things, right? You can structure that. I mean, it might be interesting if you want to try something like that, I guess. After that, it goes into creature intelligence, rules for mystics. Mystics are basically monks. They're like cloistered clerics that reside in these monastic organizations, right? And has rules for the hierarchies among them. And mystics, can use martial arts, right, to hit you depending. They hit as magical weapons. I don't think they have these as. Do they? Oh yeah, they do have rules for PC mystics. So I guess the first monk. It's kind of, I don't know. It's a thing. It's there. What else they got? They got little NPC cards to help DMs. So you have a little basic. And interestingly, I made my own NPC cards, kind of based off this a long time ago, and it's something I just continuously do. And I actually do these little cards for all the monsters too. Or like I just simplify everything into a little block whenever I DM, so that whatever creature I have, I still use the hit dice rule from like first edition to when I make a monster on the spot. It's like, well, it hits like a fighter of its equal hit dice. And that's been a golden rule that's worked for me for decades, right? But anyways, it's got that little card. It's got rules on non-human spellcasters, right, which they call shamans. So spells that shamans typically have. So when you want to make a centaur that has spells, right? A centaur shaman, it's going to give you an idea of what its spell list is going to be. Lieges, undead lieges, which are kind of cool. Rules for sort of high-level undead and how they command other undead, which is actually kind of unique, kind of fun. The one rule to gain from this, I think, it gives you a chart. The stronger the undead, the more it can command other undead, and then those undead have turn resistance. What became turn resistance. Basically, you have to be able to turn the liege, not the undead, right? So it uses the liege's hit dice for that. And what else we got? A bunch of monsters. Nothing crazy in the monsters. Maybe, they have some high-powered monsters, like liches and, night walkers, night crawlers. They do have dragons. Kind of cool dragon features. I think this is the first instance of gem dragons where they had like these new upgraded dragons. And in this edition of D&D, there's only 7 kinds of dragon, right? 6 kinds of dragon. So there's 5 kinds of dragon. They're chromatic, and then there's the gold dragon, right? So you have the white, black, green, blue, red, and then the gold. And basically the gem dragons are upgraded versions of these. So the white becomes a crystal dragon, the black becomes an onyx dragon, the green becomes a jade dragon, red's a ruby, blue's a sapphire, and gold becomes brown, which is kind of lame for gold. But there's only one good dragon in first edition D&D. Actually, in the very first D&D, I think there's only white, black, bronze, and red. Anyhow, an aside, but they have rules for their new breath weapons, and they're kind of cool. Right? Like a white dragon, a crystal dragon can crystallize your gear. Kind of fun stuff like that. I think the green dragon creates like a rotting effect. And then they have rules for what are called the dragon rulers, and there's one dragon ruler for each, for like chaotic, lawful, and neutral. And then there's the great dragon, right, which rules them all. And the dragon rulers are kind of nifty, right? It's the Pearl, the moon dragon, Opal, the sun dragon, Diamond, the star dragon, and then the great dragon. And kind of gives rules for these. These are probably some of the strongest things in this book, right? The great dragon having, so to give you an example of the old astraces, it has 40 hit dice and like 9 astraces. and it can use the breath weapon of any dragon, up to 10 attacks. Fun stuff, right? And is always accompanied by like a million other dragons, so it's a fun thing to add in there, right? But other than that, there's not a lot. There's sea giant, mountain giant, which were kind of new big giants. Hags, liches, fun stuff. A couple of planar. I know they have some planar monsters in here. Yeah, a planar spider, a phoenix, an archon, a black ball, elemental rulers, which were actually pretty strong if I remember. Yeah, 80 hit dice, 41 to 80 hit dice, hitting you for over 100 when it hits you. So that was a fun little bit. But other than that, the monsters aren't too crazy. And then the last thing it really covers is artifacts. And in this game, Lindor's Lowland Single Malt Whiskey. Artifacts. So the way artifacts work here is that it draws again on the immortal powers, so that an artifact is always created by an immortal, and it's attuned to a certain sphere, right? Time, matter, energy, and it has spells, right? And each of those spells costs a certain amount of power points, and the artifact has a default, I guess, reserve of power points, and that recharges after you use them. But if the artifact has 300 power points, it'll have a series of powers, which are all basically spells that cost anywhere between 10 and 100, and so the artifact will use these things. Now, the kind of goofy side of artifacts is that they always have what do they call them, handicaps, right? These penalties that are associated with them. And basically, if you use, it depends on every artifact that they write it, but it always has a penalty. So an example is, a lot of the penalties are if you use the max power, every time it like creates a ticker, right? And you suffer like a 10% chance of losing 4 charisma or just dying, right? So some of these artifacts, if you use the max power, every time you do, you have to save for death, right? So it's kind of a harsh penalty. Takes a lot of the fun out of it, but they do what's kind of cool about the artifacts. They give you the rules of how to create them, and how many power points a lesser versus greater versus major artifact will have. But what's actually kind of cool here and worth kind of looking at is that they create the artifacts based on historical mythology, right? So they have like the Armid of Wayland, right, based on it tells you the source, right? England, 12th century and earlier. See Wayland's Sword, Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, Kenilworth by Sir Walter Scott, Smith's Cave. It gives you the sources, right, for each. The Diamond Orb of Tyche, right, based on Greek myth. They have, what do we have here? Humbaba's Glaring Eye, right, from Gilgamesh, right? The Ivory Flute of Ma'at. What is that? That sounds familiar. Is that Persian? No, Egyptian. So it tells you Rainbow Scarf of Sinbad, right? It gives you an example of all these, and to give you an idea, the Shard of Sakrad, a major artifact, North African creation myth, has 750 power points and has all sorts of powers. Disintegrate for 80, Mass Charm for 75, Detect Magic 15, Planar Travel for 65. So it lists all the powers and what its total power level is. And then it has a little list of other artifacts you might consider putting in your game, which are kind of cool. Like, for example, it has a whole list of swords, magical swords from mythology, such as Anger Vidal, the Stream of Anguish, from Friof Saga, 13th century Scandinavian work. Balisarda, from Roland in Love. Colada, the Sword of Eliside. Durandal, the Sword of Roland, right? It was given to him by Charlemagne. Excalibur. Joyeuse Mimon Nagorine Philippin, the Sword of Mark Antony. Interesting. So a lot of kind of cool little things in there, right? You can rip off. That's one of the nice little flavor bits to it. So, and that kind of wraps up the Master's rules. In summary, there's a couple of neat little niche things in there that are worth kind of checking out. Although I kind of looked up this, I have all these box sets since the 80s, right? And I happened to look up how much it would cost. This damn box set is like $500 on eBay, which is crazy. And it even came with a cool DM screen and this little adventure called The Spindle of Heaven, right? Which is supposed to be like an adventure that gets you into immortality. And then I have this in here for some reason, Grand Duchy of... Oh, I got a lot of old school stuff, man. The Grand Duchy of Gazette, the D&D Gazetteer number 1, man. That's dorky. But yeah, cool set. Some interesting stuff. Probably the more important set from all these is probably the companion set. It's the one I remember using the most. And keep in mind, like, you know, I was in middle school when I was playing these, right? And I was just a dork. And I would just buy these, you know, with my allowance money at the local nerd shop. But it's still fun to peruse these days. It's good for inspiration. If you're an old school OSR player, there's some, you know, I wouldn't pay $500 for this. Maybe find it on PDF somewhere. I'm sure somebody has it. It is cool, worth checking out. So hope you enjoyed this little review of the Master Rules, and I will see you next time.